Welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and joining me today is Jim Riley. Jim, welcome back again.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Listen, between this show, you were 2 weeks in a row.
Oh man, this is a trend that I'm sure the fans out there will demand that continues forever.
Everyone changes the channel or
don't
runs off in the ditch.
How'd that work out for you, bud?
Hey, listen, what I wanted to talk about today, Jim, is a small handful of topic here. The changing media in America over the last 50, 60 years, and frankly, the changing storyline of what is America, and then even some of the definition of words like conservatism and liberalism, even the basic words themselves. The meaning has morphed a little bit in the last few generations.
Well, and language always changes with the times, but there seems, certainly in the last 5-10 years anyway, significant changes in the definitions of words that we would on a regular basis use, you bet.
Yeah, I think it's really went into hyperdrive in the last decade. I agree with that, but it's been a long change coming.
Yes, it has.
I get to quote Abraham Lincoln. He said, "The philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." And when I look at it that way, and I start analyzing what took place with our public school system as an example, I mean, the NEA, National Education Association, has been around since 1857 or something like that. But they really morphed from a teachers' association into a labor union with the advent of a merger of several organizations during the 60s. And if you use that as a milestone or a marker, man, things started changing quickly on an educational level around 1960. And if you look at the media in general, radio media, for instance, in the 30s and the 40s, tended to be very, very conservative.
And patriotic.
And people like Bob Hope, very patriotic. John Wayne, hugely conservative, very patriotic. Those folks are hard to find, or at least hard to find folks in Hollywood that'll admit their position or their patriotism. So all of that's kind of gotten fuzzy, and once it fuzzied up and the words were hard to define, well, then it seemed to your point in the last decade, as it started to become clear, it shifted hard left. That's my interpretation. What do you think?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the verbiage that is used by folks has shifted to the hard left, and the redefinition, for instance, the term liberal and conservative used to have meanings, traditional meanings, and they were relatively honorable. You might disagree with a liberal, you might disagree with a conservative, because they had a position on something that maybe was different from yours. But today, that term, both terms for that matter, are really demonized and have changed significantly.
I got to tell you, it's kind of interesting, because if you take the word conservative, to start with we'll look at both, but conservative first. In our founding, conservatives were on the side of the king, and they were looking to maintain the king's sovereignty. And liberals, which I by definition perceive myself as a classical liberal, not a contemporary liberal at all, but as a Jeffersonian-leaning liberal. And nowadays, when I look around, my closest political cousin are probably to your word last week, very right-wing people, because I don't...
By today's definition.
I don't, because to me, the modern liberalism has been kind of co-opted by socialism, and that's how I see it.
And that's a long time battle that's been going on. I think I mentioned on the show that even into the 1800s, leading up to the Civil War, there was a very solid and respected by many point of view that working for someone else in a factory or in any kind of a job in large numbers was equivalent to being a slave.
Right.
So the concept of socialism, the concept of group ownership, group sharing, everyone working for the benefit of everyone else is an enticing concept. And, of course, it really took hold in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Got extinguished, we thought, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It now seems to be coming back big time under the term progressivism.
I looked up a couple brochures, palm cards, of John F. Kennedy's 1960 political campaign when he first ran for president. One of them, the top of the card above his picture, is a time for greatness. And, of course, that kind of reaches to the exceptionalism of America, which is not something that the Democrat Party now tends to run on. American exceptionalism to me is how I interpret when I look at his moniker, A Time for Greatness. What do you think?
Well, you remember Ronald Reagan took over after the failed presidency of Jimmy Carter. One of a couple of disasters that happened during Jimmy Carter's administration. One of which was his speech at the end of his administration, saying, quote, "The solution to our energy crisis can also help us conquer the crisis of spirit in our country. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns." In other words, he didn't like the concept of people working hard and benefiting from it. That speech was ultimately called his malaise speech. That's the one where he sat with his cardigan sweater, talking about how bad things were and how we had to start using less energy, consuming less things. We had to reduce our expectations for greatness. Ronald Reagan had a fairly easy step off from there because Jimmy Carter was not a very popular president.
Do you remember when Jimmy Carter talked about what it was to be a common man, and he would carry his own luggage up the flight ladder to Air Force One?
Yes, I do remember seeing videos of that.
But the fun part about that is the behind the scenes is that the suitcases he carried were empty, and all of the luggage was actually still being done the way it had always been done for a president. And it was all stage props.
Phony does come out ultimately, and I think many people really did view him as a phony. And of course, now we know Jimmy Carter as the second worst president in modern times, of course, eclipsed by the current president, President Barack Hussein Obama.
Listen, let me take us back to JFK for a minute, because I hunted very, very hard yesterday evening trying to find some of his palm cards. I wanted to see what the Democrat Party represented in 1960. The only other palm card I could find, and I'm not saying there aren't others out there, I found one that said, like I mentioned, A Time for Greatness.
Explain palm card, though.
Palm card is what a candidate, especially a door-to-door candidate, will hand a potential voter. It'll have usually a picture on them, and it'll have 4 or 5 points of what he wants to run.
What I stand for.
Yeah.
Great.
In these cases, it was a picture. The other one read at the top of it, "A Time for Moral Leadership." And I thought,
you'd never hear that from the Democrats today.
Moral leadership, is that like a war on women? Is it did he not want to pay for birth control of somebody else somewhere else? It's fascinating how these concepts have shifted and become,
because this is a Democrat saying a time for moral leadership.
He's the leader of the Democrat Party, and he's one that we still rightfully, as a president, we still look back with some reverence for this man. But what he was saying is so contrary to the people that are embracing his it's just a fascinating thing to me.
Well, again, if you look at go back to the 70s, or go back to the 60s, of course, John Kennedy beat Richard Nixon for the presidency back then in an election that we now know was stolen, voter fraud within the city of Chicago. It was alive then, and it continues to be alive today. But the big issues of the day were the economy to a certain extent, but both of the candidates ran on reducing taxes to increase the productivity of the economy. Both candidates were running for on a platform to increase the budget of our military and national defense. As a matter of fact, if you go back and look at the differences between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon in that campaign, it's almost impossible to find a major issue that they differed on. The main campaign was essentially personality. John Kennedy had an attractive wife, and Richard Nixon didn't, among other things.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Yes.
That's not a moniker of modern contemporary liberalism.
No. A vote for a politician who will give you free stuff as opposed to do things yourself to create income for yourselves.
Are you trying to say that free stuff isn't a good thing, Jim?
the people getting free stuff quite often say they like it, but of course, the classic example to me in our country is Detroit, Michigan's gotten more free stuff per resident probably than any other place in the United States. And how did that work out for the folks in Detroit? We just see just this past week with a big rainstorm, but certainly not an unprecedented rainstorm. The entire city flooded because not only is the city morally bankrupt, the infrastructure that was in perfect shape in the 60s and even into the 70s had been allowed to collapse. That's what happened to the Soviet Union. That's what happens to socialist-driven entities everywhere. Detroit is, sadly, I think, Detroit with its socialistic leadership, the people who vote for people who give them free stuff, it is the canary in the coal mine today. It's an indication of where we're going to go if we keep having that kind of, quote, leadership, end quote.
I'm reading from a John F. Kennedy presidential brochure. Senator Kennedy has consistently advocated increased military strength as the soundest basis for a durable and lasting peace.
Well, and John Kennedy was a true hero. Both Kennedy and Nixon served in the military, but Nixon was behind the front lines. John Kennedy, as we know from the PT 109 experience, was not only an accomplished naval officer, but when faced with disaster, he was heroic at any levels. You can imagine. Can you imagine a Democrat politician in today's world who was a real hero in one of America's recent wars? I just don't see it happening. Unfortunately, those folks tend to move to the Republican Party. The Democrats, as we know, view disarmament, view accommodation with the Soviets at one time, now with Russia, and view pulling out without any plans of what's going to happen after we pull out. They view that as a sound policy.
They write on his brochure, Fiscal Responsibility. Senator Kennedy, chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee, guided 30 bills through Congress that improved efficiency in government. And it goes on to talk about how much efficiency his bills, had they passed, would have saved for the government by reducing government bureaucracy, etc. These things are just so far removed from the dialogue that we're hearing, not just from Obama. And listen, I'm not trying to attack the Democrat Party today. I'm really wanting to focus on how these concepts have changed and shifted. And I can do the same thing on topics like line item veto. When Ronald Reagan was a president, the Republican Party wanted to advance line item veto. That was a big thing. Nowadays, that's not so much a big thing.
Well, let me just clarify on that. The Republicans, that was part of the contract with America, the line item veto. That did pass both houses and was signed into law. Unfortunately, it was challenged, and the Supreme Court vetoed it and said that it's not allowed within our system.
Unconstitutional.
I would like to just maybe mention where we have gotten today in the Republican Party, because one of the things that Republicans, the voters, the average person, myself certainly included, one of the things that we are perhaps fooled by is you look at the Republican Party platform, be it at a state level or the national level, and one of the most important parts of that platform is fiscal responsibility. And fiscal responsibility, just by a normal definition, would be not spending money that you don't have, unless it's really, really critically important. And we have a situation here in West Michigan where Congressman from the Grand Rapids area, Justin Amash, is very vocal and votes against bills that have the spending where there's no money available for it. And he has been punished by the Republican leadership for doing so. And again, Republicans have got this self-appointed title, if you will, of being conservative. In other words, looking at fiscal conservatism, much like Democrat John Kennedy did. But the reality is that when they are in charge, those fiscal conservatives seem to spend much like the Democrats that they would like to demonize themselves.
I think for me, when I look at that specific topic, it isn't necessarily Democrat or Republican. For me, it goes back to the electorate, what the electorate is demanding. And that, to me, goes to the definition of words, which is really why I wanted to do the show this way today. And it goes to the concept of John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you. That's polar opposite of what the electorate is asking for. You and I talked last week about 90% of the electorate not bothering to vote in a primary, even though in most of the races in Michigan, the primaries where the decision is made, there'll be not much of a general at all because it's a guaranteed outcome. Whether it's a Democrat area and a Democrat will win, or Ottawa County where a Republican will win, whoever wins in the primary will likely, overwhelmingly likely, win in the general. And yet 90% of the people didn't bother. And so then when you start looking at that and say now it's over 50% of the American electorate, the American citizenry, I should say, that are receiving some form of government benefit. And that is just upside down. I think people have a tendency of voting their own wallet. And so when you start looking in a person's wallet, when over half of those people have money in their wallet from government is not costing them. Government is financially, specifically and individually benefiting them money-wise. They're giving them money. That controls everything to me.
Well, that's true. And it's, what a lot of people don't understand, and I've come slowly to understand. Just this past week here in Muskegon County, there was a $60,000 grant given from a variety of essentially governmental sources to study the opening a food hub in Muskegon County, probably in the city of Muskegon. What happens here, the support for these things is the food hub would essentially be a grocery store run by government. In other words, people being hired by government. The study, of course, is going to hire people. It's going to they will then for sure come out just like they did with the farmers market. With the results of the study will be, oh my golly, we need a food hub, and there will then be federal money or state money, probably both, that will support a building, which will support, of course, the building contractors will support that. The employees who will ultimately be city or county or state employees.
How much was the money?
On and on.
How much was the money for the study?
In this case, it was only $60,000. But think about it: $60,000 to find out what you've already decided you want to be found out. You can be sure the study isn't going to say we don't need a food hub.
You're trying to say the study has a directive result.
I would think that would be the case. So we see that all the time. Muskegon County had any number of studies, expensive, some of which were in the $100,000 range. Does Muskegon County need a new county jail? Almost every one of them said no until the last one. They finally found one that said yes.
That's the one we're going to stick with.
And that's the one they stuck with.
Folks, we'll be right back.
I've made a discovery. The down-home community our grandparents loved is still here. Seriously, that's what you'll find at Renegade River in downtown Spring Lake. You might be looking for a new or used hunting rifle or something for personal defense. Maybe a DNR sport license or fishing supplies, personal and home defense, hunting, Army, Navy supplies, fishing, survival gear, and even a tools and guy stuff consignment department. You'll be greeted by low prices and quick professional service provided by shopkeeper like Hewitt. If you're not in a hurry, grab a cup of coffee and join in the conversation. Renegade River, firearms, hunting, personal protection and survival gear, going camping, or looking for emergency products. Come take advantage of the prices while meeting up with old friends and making new ones. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake, or go to the website renegaderiver.com. Sunday, September 14th at 3 p.m., there'll be a oldies dance and spaghetti dinner at the White Lake Eagles. For a $5 donation, all money to benefit Terry Osbo and her kidney transplant surgery. We'll also have items for raffle, like jewelry, gift certificates, tanning and hair care items, Harley-Davidson shirts, Bud Light Grill, a cooler in the shape of a canoe, Michigan Adventure tickets, wine tasting at Lemon Creek, hotel stays, and tons of oldies from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Sunday, September 14th at 3 p.m. at the White Lake Eagles in Whitehall.
I use catheters, and if you do too, please listen carefully to this life-changing breakthrough. There is a new catheter that hurts less and you can get a free sample by calling this number now.
Pain and urinary tract infections have been avoided by many of my patients. These new disposable catheters hurt less. It's an incredible new design that reduces pain. The eyelets are polished, so they glide smoothly and effortlessly across your sensitive skin. The old catheters would scrape and cut, causing pain and infections.
These new catheters are totally different, so smooth and painless. They changed my life.
Call now and get a free sample. Medicare and your insurance will pay for up to 200 of these catheters per month, all at little or no cost to you. Medical Direct Club handles all the paperwork with your doctor and includes lifetime free shipping when you call and join. Membership is free. Call now and get your free sample and painful capping today.
Are you one of the many Americans who undergo CPAP or BiPAP therapy? Replacing your supplies every 3 to 6 months is critical, as bacteria will build up and worn-out straps cause leaks. Call Allied Medical Supply Network and speak to an expert agent who will set up a schedule for your supplies to be delivered right to your door at little or no cost to you. Call Allied Medical Supply Network today and rest easy.
Call 800-284-2512. That's 800-284-2512.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. Hey, Jim, one of the things I wanted to talk about today is I heard you on the Talkin' Muskegon show midweek, I think it was midweek, and you were talking about, you went to see the movie America.
The Dinesh D'Souza movie, America. Yes, it was fabulous.
Tell me your interpretation. Did you learn anything?
Yes, I went with the group of people. We learned things, and I'm a big history buff. I have read any number of books about American history and world history, certainly Western Hemisphere history, and I learned lots and lots of things that I did not know. And what we talked about it afterwards, and one of the consensus comments was, isn't this interesting that these are things that Americans ought to be proud of, or at least not ashamed of, and yet those of us who are interested in history have never seen them. And as an example, one, of course, there was the fact that most of the genocide, because we hear from the people who are not fond of America, many of whom are Americans, that the future Americans came in and killed wantonly with acts, with violence and with disease and all the various indigenous people from South America, Central America, and North America. But in fact, the movie America clarified the reality that almost all of that, probably 95% plus, happened before America was even constituted. Much of it happened under the Spanish, the Portuguese, and other countries that came in and took over, of course, South and Central America. And the disease, the influenza, things of that sort that wiped out the various Indians or indigenous groups happened long before we arrived. And, of course, there were many, many wonderful success stories of black Americans, African at that time, or recent Africans, and the successes that they'd had, none of which we'd ever had an inkling had happened.
You talked about, when I was listening to your show, you talked about slavery. Specifically, that there was black-owned slaves.
Fascinating.
Am I saying that correctly?
Well, yes, there were African Americans at the time who, again, recently come over, relatively recently, who owned slaves, mostly in the South, and the number of actual slaves owned by black Americans exceeded the number of slaves owned by white Americans.
And it was primarily, as I understand it, in terms of taking Africans here, in Africa was primarily black people that were doing that.
Well, that's an interesting. That wasn't really much discussed in the movie, but yes, the reality that, again, people who want to demonize Americans today, conveniently for their argument, forget, is that the Africans that were brought here as slaves were, for the most part, captured by other Africans, stronger tribes, and then sold or brokered through, in many cases, right, Islamic Arabs, right, who then got them off to the various ports on the African continent, and then shipped over primarily by Spanish and English ships.
Right, and the reason I wanted to bring that up, by the way, was not to exonerate white people, but to say evil knows no race. It doesn't. I think a whole bunch of different races took part in a very evil act. But they don't talk about that in junior high when you're learning this topic.
No, they use the truth to demonize a very a political sector. They don't. They will not admit that. In fact, and today in Africa going on, we're seeing slavery. We're seeing sexual slavery. We're seeing in many cases with Islamic Arabs in Africa. It continues to go today. We're seeing one of the reasons, ostensibly, that the President of the United States is allowing so many of these illegals coming across is the fears of sexual slavery in people coming at our southern border.
It's an amazing thing. So what else was in the movie? I know that when you were talking about it the other day, there were a series of things you touched on, and you're probably drawing a blank now, but I found just intriguing as can be.
Well, there was the I wish you'd given me this question beforehand, and I could have looked it up. There was a black lady, again, an African, relatively new. She grew up on a plantation.
Right.
Was a freed black woman who started a company in, I believe it was in or around the Charleston, South Carolina area, which sold beauty products, mostly to black people, but not exclusively. And it became almost a kind of a version of Amway, or what's the beauty
Mary
products?
Kay?
The Mary Kay, or that
Sure.
kind of thing, where people would buy franchises. She started selling this concoction that women liked.
This is 1700s America?
This was probably early 1800s. Remember, the 1776 is when our country at least actually got started, if you will. But it was in the early 1800s. And one of the neat parts of this story, again, a story that I had never heard until this Indian American, Denise D'Souza, put it on film, was that not only did she have a manufacturing production facility, not only did she have a fairly sophisticated transportation and delivery system, but she operated it much like Amway, where she sold franchises. And other women, she was giving in rooms the speeches to all these other black ladies who were trying to make a decent life for themselves, and saying, you sell my product, I get a little piece, you get a little piece, you can benefit from my experience. This went all through the South.
Right.
What a wonderful story, and what a tragedy that
Nobody knows about it.
That people in Detroit, people in Muskegon County, the people in the United States did not know about it. Yeah,
and the reason they don't know, to me, is that there's a political gag on a lot of the truth. If I only tell you a sliver of the truth and deny you knowing the whole story, that's a lie to me. If I'm purposely causing you to have a perception that isn't true by denying you of the entire story, it's a lie.
Well, you mentioned people like to get free stuff. If you are a government type, someone who wants expanded government, expanded powers for yourself and for your cronies, if you will, you don't want people to know that you can succeed on your own. You want them to believe that you are a victim, that the only possible way that you can have any kind of success in life for yourself or your family is through government. You are going to hide the stories of those who have succeeded. And if there is a difference today from the 60s and the 70s, it is that one political party, the Democrat Party, is really pushing the fact that Americans are victims. The President of the United States stuck his hand out and pointed to the small business owners of the country, the big business owners of the country, and said, you didn't accomplish that. Well, yeah, they did. And I'm not a big fan of the Republican Party, but it frightens me when you've got a whole political party whose basis is you can do nothing without us, and the us being the government. Ask not what you can do for your government. Ask what your government can do for you.
It's a fascinating thing, and I've talked about this. I think a couple years ago, Oscar, you might remember, but I was born with a heart defect, and so as I grew up, I had a number of surgeries as a very young person, and I think it was third grade that my mother sought some substitute teaching from me that was provided for by the government. And once you get embroiled in that, once you get connected to the government, and you get labeled, you're disabled, and they start giving the labels to you, and they get you into their clutches. Listen, now, it's hard to pull away from them. And even into my early life, one of my first jobs, I remember sitting there watching. I watched a man and a woman walk by my desk. They went in to see my manager, and when I didn't know what they wanted at the time, but what it turned out that they wanted is that they were from the Michigan Rehabilitation Center, and they were there to offer my employer, who had already hired me, I was already working, they went in to offer my employer half of their work comp would be paid, half of my wages would be paid, etc. So even though I've got a job and I'm trying to contribute, I've got the government right there trying to turn me into a dependent of them.
Well, because they were dependent on having you as a customer.
Yeah, but listen, I riled against that hard. I hate to use that word. I riled really hard against that rationale. And now that I'm 53, when I look back, I've raised 4 daughters that are successful. I got 9 grandkids. And I ask myself, what would my life have been? What accomplishments? Now, I've had accomplishments and failures. I think that's what life is. But when I look back and say, what would have happened if I would have followed the path that they tried to get me on, which was Social Security disability, and what I refer to as a ward of the state, even as an adult, I don't want to be a ward of anybody. And to me, it's financial bondage. Grossly insulted by the concept, but wow, it sends a shiver up my spine to think what my life would have been like if I would have allowed them to trap me in that kind of environment.
And at a young age, you didn't really have a tremendous choice. You had a job. Could almost have been foisted upon you. One of the cool stories from this movie, America, again, please get a chance to see this if you can, is a black conservative columnist and author, Star Parker, really attractive lady. She gave a little story of when she was on welfare with little babies at home, and someone came to her outside of the social system and said, hey, if you start writing and if you start doing some things, you can get off of welfare and you can have a future for yourself. And she said her first thought was, you're crazy. I get a paycheck twice a month from the government. Right. I'm not going to give that up.
Right.
And it's almost impossible for somebody to do that. Once you get on that train, Star Parker was able to do it, but it was really her energy in saying what a crazy concept that I would give up. She didn't say a check. I would give up a paycheck.
Right.
Simply for living.
Right.
And in fact, as she did, and her life is, and I would say the lives of those who read her columns have been tremendously enhanced.
One of my immediate relatives works with people that have mild disabilities, and all of the people that we're talking about are on a government program. They don't function. They're not working, probably capable of it. My cure has always been, if you want to find out who really has a problem, cut off the valve for a minute, because everyone that doesn't will go find a job. It'll be a miracle. But my point in bringing that topic up is that their concern over the minimum wage issue over this past early summer, when we had the push for an increased minimum wage, and now there's going to be minimum wage increases. Their concern was not, great, I'm going to make more money, but rather the opposite. I can't work at all now because that will cut into my benefits. I thought, what benefits? You get benefits from having a good job that you worked for. But that's not, you talked about paycheck from her. These folks look at it as a benefit, and I thought benefit was the product of having a good job you've earned.
Well, again, we have created a system, and while the Democrat Party may be the party that has been really pushing it, it hasn't gotten a lot of pushback from the Republican Party, and we're creating a system where people from birth are inculcated into the concept that you don't have to do anything, that in fact you are entitled not just to subsistence, not just to food to survive, but you are entitled to respect.
Right.
You are entitled to housing. You are entitled to education, even if you choose to go for the food. We see this time and again, these training programs where talk to somebody who works at one of these training programs. They sit there until maybe 10 to noon. All the trainees come in for the food, and then they split. You're entitled to any number of benefits. One of the awful things that is happening here in Michigan a lot, we're seeing all these wrong way head-on collisions on our highways. almost everyone who is the perpetrator of these crimes does not have a driver's license and is not paying, of course, auto insurance. So what we've created is this indemnity from responsibility. You do not have to maintain your lawn or your home. You do not have to control your impulses. If you haul off and pop somebody, number one, we know we're not going to put you in jail unless you killed them, and you're not going to be able to be sued in civil court. All of us would be, we withhold our emotions in somebody we might want to do something to because of the negatives. And now everyone in the state, probably in the country, is paying significantly higher auto insurance because we have a massive group of people who believe that they are not responsible or required to do the normal things the rest of us have to do.
Picture a time in your life when you had some kind of strife, or maybe take yourself out of the element and pick somebody you know who's had some financial challenges, lost a job, whatever the circumstance was. And imagine, because the reason I'm taking us down this path for a minute is you have a tendency of referring to this as a party politics issue, and I really see it as a cultural issue. So, and not party politics whatsoever. I think the culture, what steers the parties. So take that element aside for just a minute. You got this person who's downtrodden on their luck. Maybe they've been let go. Maybe their house is in jeopardy. They've already lost it. And you've got two political candidates. Forget the party for a moment. One of the political candidates is saying, listen, this is not your fault. This is the fault of this person and that entity and that cause and
Bad
that
luck.
era. It's bad luck. Whatever the circumstances, Jim, it's not your fault. It's going to be okay. And in the meantime, I'm going to make sure it's okay by giving you some stuff that'll tide you over. Okay? You got the other person saying, you know what, if you hadn't have done this and that, you probably wouldn't be here, because results are usually results are the end of good decision making or bad decision making. So the question is, now that you're in this jam, how are you going to work yourself forward? Now those two sales pitches, talking to a person that's in trouble, one is not going to get your vote, even though that person's telling you the truth.
Well, okay, not shockingly, I'm going to disagree with you.
No, that's never happened before, Oscar.
Well, and let me tell you why, though. Yes, if everyone voted, absolutely, the person giving away most free stuff is going to get elected.
Right.
But as we just saw in our state, certainly in our county, less than 13% of the people of the registered voters came out and voted. We see when there's a property tax increase that would be county-wide, in some cases we see less than 5% of the people come out against it. What's happened is the differences between the two parties, perhaps driven by cultural, I don't really care about the motivation, but the differences between the two political parties, once they have power, evaporates, unfortunately. You've seen, certainly in Michigan State, with a Republican governor, House, and Senate, any number of programs to expand the socialist state have just sailed through. And I think what's happened today is the big government people have succeeded not by even offering more or providing a more compelling argument. They've won because they have so disappointed us and made the rest of us so despondent over how our vote would be that we stay back. That's what I found from people who I've chastised this last month and in the most recent elections is, why didn't you vote? Well, because it doesn't really matter. And the reality is, sadly, it doesn't.
You know what? You're right. We don't agree, and I'm going to have fun with this in the final segment. Folks, we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, we're going to pick up right there because it will be fun.
You won't have fun.
Yeah, we're going to have fun.
This is a national health alert from Worldwide Medical. Are you on Medicare? And do you suffer from back or knee pain? Have you tried injections, pain pills, or even had or considered surgery? If these examples apply to you or a loved one in pain, stop. There is a better way. You could qualify to receive a pain-relieving back or knee brace at little or no cost to you. You'll receive free information, free delivery, and all the insurance paperwork is handled for free. Best of all, there is little to no cost to you for the braces. Call 1-800-282-6789 to get all the details. It takes just a couple of minutes. These amazing braces have helped thousands of people in severe pain, and you may qualify to have yours delivered directly to your door at little or no cost to you. Call 1-800-282-6789 right now. This may be the most important call you make all year. That's 800-282-6789. Call now.
I've made a discovery. The down-home community our grandparents loved is still here. Seriously, that's what you'll find at Renegade River in downtown Spring Lake. You might be looking for a new or used hunting rifle or something for personal defense. Maybe a DNR sport license or fishing supplies, personal and home defense, hunting, Army, Navy supplies, fishing, survival gear, and even a tools and guy stuff consignment department. You'll be greeted by low prices and quick professional service provided by shopkeeper like Hewitt. If you're not in a hurry, grab a cup of coffee and join in the conversation. Renegade River, firearms, hunting, personal protection and survival gear, going camping, or looking for emergency products. Come take advantage of the prices while meeting up with old friends and making new ones. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake, or go to the website renegaderiver.com.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show, where I'm going to take a minute to show you you're wrong, Jim.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
This will
yeah.
be a first.
Listen, it's a
Go for it.
Let me tell you why I think it's a cultural thing. And I'm going
Bring it on.
The folks that are in power, regardless of party, okay, they want to get elected.
The most important thing in their lives is to get reelected, you bet.
Here's the exact point that I'm making. If doing what you and I think is the right thing would get them reelected, that's what they would do. And let me use as an example we just had a primary, and there were, I can't remember the exact number, but I think there were 7 Republicans that were primaried on this exact topic. All of them prevailed. Every single one of them won overwhelmingly with the few people that elected to vote. That may be key here, okay, but the folks that didn't are part of the culture also, and they didn't for a reason. These folks that were primaried for doing what you and I don't agree with were overwhelmingly elected. If you look at the votes...
Well, Justin Amash is a classic case.
I understand, but now you're dealing with $1 million campaign. I'm talking about
still, he prevailed. This buttresses your argument.
It is, but that's the only exception. There's 2 exceptions you can find nationally. Both of them are congressional level. All of the state house and state senate seats where they did things that were progressive, that fed the culture with freebies, which is against my ideology, they won.
I'm sorry. You're saying that the people giving away, they beat the challenge.
The people with free money.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
The people with free money that have got somebody else's wallet open and are giving away free money, those people were challenged. And I don't want to paint with a broad brush. Some of those 7 people were probably very good, and we just differ on a few things. That said, they were the ones that were primary. They won with monstrous, overwhelming vote percentage.
Well, here in Muskegon County, we had Senator Jeff Hansen won overwhelmingly against a very solid conservative,
right, in
Nick Sundquist. So yes.
And my point then is that this is a cultural thing, and the reason that when folks get elected, and not all of them, because Justin is an example of a guy that stayed on principle and stayed on his initial campaign message. He's going to vote for limited government. That's what the man's going to do, and every time he's voted, even if on pale you pause and said, I don't agree with the vote, then you read his description of it, and you'll find that they had 2 or 3 other items stuck in the vote that caused him not to be able to support whatever.
Yes.
So, and listen, what I liked about the man is that anyone that wants to know what he's doing and why he did it can find it for free on Facebook. But that debate aside, these votes that we're disagreeing with in Lansing or in D.C., I say this in defense of both Democrats and Republicans, by the way, they're caused by society. And let me give you another example. While we were on break, Oscar and I were talking about, he had an example of someone north of 50 years old trying to get a job. I can give you an example with my sister, who's been in the studio a couple times now. When Vegas went through their big market shrinkage a couple years ago, and Vegas was hit really hard by the recession because they're all tourism. And one of the very first things that folks don't do, one of the first things in an economy tightened that they have to scrap is things like vacation and gambling, etc.
Certainly.
So that market was hit huge, and when she lost her position because of job shrinkage in Vegas, she's north of 50 years old. She worked for a long time trying to replace the job. On one hand, we could sit and say those mean, evil corporate son of a guns and we're the Republicans or the Democrats to help. But the reality is, the reason she can't find a job is that the culture wants to look at a good-looking 30-year-old, not someone that's 50 like me or her. That's just the reality, that we don't have to like it, and we can legislate against it, but it's a cultural reality, and it isn't going to change real quick.
Well, it certainly isn't going to change if people don't try, and if qualified, articulate, passionate people do not prevail. I would look at this most recent election here in Michigan and some of the other states that I've been familiar with and have a little more reason for optimism. I think that when you have such a small turnout, that means that those people who are not voting are willing to listen, but they have not heard the story that is going to motivate them to get out and to vote. And as we saw with Justin Amash, and even as we saw with the candidates who lost,
right,
as someone who's run for political office, as have you, it's a tremendously expensive, time-consuming, emotionally draining event for anybody. If you are an elected politician, and make no mistake about this, elected politicians probably have the best job they could ever imagine. There are some exceptions, but it's the best job they could ever imagine. They will do anything to hold on to that job. And when they hear that someone has come out and said, I'm going to challenge you in the primary, not only is there that visceral fear that goes to your very soul that you might lose that job that you so covet, but this person is going to say bad things about you. Nobody wants to be publicly said the bad things about. They're going to outline and highlight your votes and generally make your sleep awful from the beginning of that campaign until the end. So even in a loss, the message has been sent. And be it the Tea Party or certainly on the Democrat, the left side, you've got folks who are pushing, for free everything these days. I just happened to see an article that said women shouldn't have to pay for tampons. This is the United Nations ought to get involved and provide free tampons to people. So there are struggles on both sides, but we have a low turnout. That means there's opportunity for those to articulate the benefits of success, and John Engler did it in the middle of the greatest. Believe it or not, the recession of the '80s was worse than the recession that we have just experienced here in Michigan,
right.
And the seductiveness of the free lunch was just as powerful. And yet John Engler articulated it, went out and won. I believe it can be won.
I would suggest to you, though, that our culture has steered vastly to the left in the last few years than it was when England was in office.
It'll be harder today.
It really has, and to me, one of the reasons we're on this is it goes back to when we began the show today, when I quoted Abraham Lincoln, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. In other words, I don't think what we're seeing right now, I don't think that Obama can take credit for this massive transition we've seen during his administration. I think this goes back to when you and I were young people, and maybe even before that. This is something that progressives, not liberals, because I'm a classical liberal, so I have to look at the word progressive or socialist, the people that are controlling the power unions. I'm not talking about your average person that just has a union job. I'm talking about the people at the top of those pyramids that have been steering our education for the last 50 or 60 years. They knew a long time ago that Abraham Lincoln was exactly right. If they could change the philosophy of the classroom, they would, in fact, inevitably get what they wanted. And I think that we're watching the fruits of their effort put in generations ago. I very passionately believe that. This didn't just happen.
Well, I would agree, and it's, as you say, it's a relatively modern concept that the schools have changed. One of the reasons that those of us who know much about the Middle East, one of the reasons we find it hard to believe that it can change is that their schools, which are called madrasas, aren't really for education. They are for brainwashing. They are for, of course, the endless memorization of the Quran and purely religious, frankly, just brainwashing young students. To a certain extent, we are doing that in our classrooms at public educations. One of the reasons for the explosion in private schools and charter schools and homeschooling is parents who are seeing this one-sided political brainwashing of their children, and they're pulling them out. The problem with that is that leaves fewer people interested in fixing the public school system. Teachers and teachers' unions tend to vote overwhelmingly Democrat, and when they are educating in their classes, when they are making decisions as to what books we're going to be using for history books and the like, they are taking the side where America is a bad country, capitalism is bad, the state can make your life better, etc., and so on. When you go through 13, 14, 15 years of public education with that only one-sided view, the result is to be expected.
If we have a school system that teaches people of all races in America right now that only Christian English people from white Europe are the only people that enslaved anybody, then we've got essentially what you just described, with that we've got a propagandist process and not an educational process right now. That's part of the reason that we have the ongoing endless racial explosions in America, is because our schools are teaching them one sliver of truth, which makes it a lie, because it's not the whole story.
Well, remember,
all of these things are related.
Well, remember, too, that the corollary to this lie is that those who do have what someone else would covet, they have unfairly. Remember the senator, or at the time the wife of President Clinton, who was demonizing those who had unfairly profited from the greed of the 80s. In other words, just like what was going on this past week down in the South, or in the St. Louis area, where you have rioting in the streets over a young man who was shot by a police officer. These people are breaking windows. They are looting out the businesses of that they probably depended on, many of them maybe for jobs, certainly for the services and goods that they sold, because they've been inculcated their entire lives that those who have it only because they stole it from those who do not, that they are unfairly in possession of a good life. That is a recipe for revolution.
It's certainly a recipe to cause the explosion you're describing out in the streets of that community. But listen, we saw the same thing in the riots of the Watts riots out in
Detroit riots in '67.
Detroit riots and the Detroit riots in 1943 that no one ever talks about. And those were so bad that they brought in the Texas National Guard to secure the streets again. And it all goes back down to, are we telling the entire truth? Are we, if we're going to teach history, which we really got to, or the cliche will be destined to repeat it, but we got to teach the whole truth. We've got to do that. Now you've got citizens, to your point earlier, you said, well, some of these people that don't vote feel that their vote has no meaning. But then in the same hour segment, you also talked about how JFK didn't really win because a very few numbers of voters in Chicago cheated. And I tell you that because
it wasn't the voters; it was the political machine that cheated. The voters who
it was the dead people.
It was dead people.
The problem with that concept is that's how close that election was going to be. We have a tendency nowadays of thinking, wow, we've got this really vitriol, mean-spirited political culture. It was every bit as bad then as it is now.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, and the same could be said for the late 60s, or the same could be said for the 1940s.
Ronald Reagan continues to be demonized by the left and much of the media.
Because he still overshadows a lot of their argument with the concept that liberty works better, and it does.
Well, I just think that when you have low turnouts in elections, that is an opportunity. That's the optimism that I have. I understand people who have pulled themselves out of the political world, have said, I'm not going to vote anymore because they're all the same. I would agree with them in many, many instances, except in the primaries. What I'm seeing is there is more engagement at the lower levels, and I do believe over time we're going to see people who have chosen not to vote say, wait a minute, there is a choice out there. And I do believe there is opportunity to present a winning and a logical choice.
If we go to district hours meetings for the state representative here in this community, is it Lamonte?
Correct.
If you go to the district hours meetings that Amanda Price has, my state representative, 3 or 4 people are there. In a district that has well over 100,000 people, 3 or 4 people are concerned enough to go visit either one of these two
At
sitting
least
state
you can
reps.
get the information on the internet. I'm disappointed at the physical turnout.
I'm flabbergasted because we all say these people are untouchable, unreachable, and my vote doesn't matter. But these people go out of their way. They really do, including Amanda Price, including the Democrat here. These folks go out of their way to reach out to constituents.
Yes, they do.
And are reaching out into the empty air. So, folks,
It's up to us.
Jim, thanks for joining me today. Folks, we'll see you next week.
Brought to you by Renegade River.
Five years ago, Bo Bergdahl deserted his infantry airborne combat team and is a traitor. But he pales in comparison to the traitor-in-chief. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, the desertion of traitor Bergdahl is awful. 6 heroes lost their lives looking for that dedicated Muslim who may have helped Islamic terrorists in their jihad against U.S. armed forces. But infinitely more insidious is the traitorous White House occupier who released 5 dedicated Muslim mass murderers from Gitmo, which is a slap in the face of the military heroes who captured them. The traitor-in-chief has systematically dismantled needed military weaponry, placing not only our republic turned mob-rule democracy in danger, but also our allies such as New Zealand, Taiwan, and Australia, who are now being harassed by China. Let's not forget that the traitor-in-chief plans to reduce our U.S. nuclear missile stockpile to 270, while Russia maintains 6,000 that we know about. The traitor-in-chief has yet to put forth any meaningful effort to secure the release of American-born Christian pastor Saeed Abedini, who continues to be tortured by dedicated Muslims. May God have mercy on our nation for the choices made to land her in this dilemma. I'm Ron Edwards.
I've made a discovery. The down-home community our grandparents loved is still here. Seriously, that's what you'll find at Renegade River in downtown Spring Lake. You might be looking for a new or used hunting rifle or something for personal defense. Maybe a DNR sport license or fishing supplies, personal and home defense, hunting, Army, Navy supplies, fishing, survival gear, and even a tools and guy stuff consignment department. You'll be greeted by low prices and quick professional service provided by shopkeeper like Hewitt. If you're not in a hurry, grab a cup of coffee and join in the conversation. Renegade River, firearms, hunting, personal protection and survival gear, going camping, or looking for emergency products. Come take advantage of the prices while meeting up with old friends and making new ones. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake, or go to the website renegaderiver.com. My name is Oscar Osbo, Oscar Osbo Audio and Video. I've been doing it for over 14 years here in the White Lake area. Been doing the video for over 20 and radio for over 30. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I do and I can do for you. I can make commercials for much cheaper than the other guys. Video editing, life stories, music videos, and sporting events. I also been a DJ for over 30 years, so I have a DJ service that I like to bring to your next special event. So give me a call at 231-288-3580 or 231-894-0091. That's 894-0091. Also, one of my specialties is to transfer your VHS tapes, your cassette tapes, your 8-track tape, your DV tape, your VHC tape, your 8mm, your Super 8mm. How about your High 8, or maybe even your records? I can digitally transfer those, usually be better than the originals. And to do that, I only charge $10 a DVD and $5 a CD to do the transfer. And then copies are even cheaper. So give me a call now if you have any of those things that you want done just for you. Oscar Osbo Audio and Video at 894-0091 or 288-3580. Call me today.